Have you ever been so certain of your own strength, so utterly convinced of the infallibility of your own two hands, that you became completely blind to the quiet, tectonic power standing right in front of you? What if everything you thought you knew about weakness and strength, about speed and slowness, about victory and defeat, was just a fragile illusion? A house of cards waiting for a single, gentle, devastating exhale to bring it all down. Welcome back to Tales of Wonder. If you enjoy stories where towering pride takes a graceful, humbling tumble, and where the loudest lessons are taught in a whisper, then you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed and that bell is clicked because the deepest dramas often play out on the most ordinary stages. Now, let's begin today's story. The city park, known locally as Morning Harmony Garden, was not a place of dramatic landscapes. It was a pragmatic, government plot rectangle of green in a district of aging concrete apartment blocks. But every dawn, it underwent a transformation. It became a living museum of Chinese daily life, a breathing tapestry of routines. The air, still cool and carrying the damp scent of night-watered grass and distant street food oil, was punctuated by a symphony of low-decibel life. The squeak of a rusty swing, the clatter of mahjong tiles from a sheltered pagoda, the soft, syncopated slap of hands on stone as men and women performed the ancient back-patting exercise to stimulate their meridians. And there, in the far northeastern corner, under the benevolent, sprawling canopy of a century-old banyan tree, its aerial roots hanging like the wispy beard of a wise elder, was Master Li's kingdom. He arrived not with fanfare, but with the inevitability of the rising sun. A slight, wiry figure, he moved with an economical grace that suggested every motion, even the unlocking of his old bicycle, was part of a larger, deliberate practice. His face was a roadmap of gentle wrinkles, not the deep trenches of hardship, but the fine, feathery lines of a lifetime of quiet observation and perhaps frequent smiling. His eyes, the color of dark tea, held a peculiar quality. They seemed both deeply focused on the immediate, the fall of a leaf, the pattern of light through the leaves, and simultaneously aware of something vast and distant. His practice space was unassuming, a patch of worn, smooth pavement where the tree's roots had gently buckled the tiles into a subtle, organic unevenness. He would begin not with movement, but with stillness. Standing in what is known as wuji posture, feet shoulder-width, knees soft, arms resting lightly at his sides, he would simply be there. For 5, sometimes 10 minutes, he was a statue of tranquility. To the hurried glance of a jogger or a young parent chasing a toddler, he was part of the scenery, as inert as the stone bench nearby. Then the movement would begin. Tai Chi Chuan, the grand ultimate fist. In Master Li's hands, it was anything but fistic. It was a slow, continuous, liquid unwinding of the body. Commencement of the form. His hands would rise as if buoyed by water, his weight sinking imperceptibly into his right leg. Grasp the sparrow's tail. A ward-off, a rollback, a press, a push, each transition smoother than silk sliding over glass. There was no audible effort, no grunt of strain. It was a visual poem of balance and yield, a conversation between his body and the unseen forces of gravity and space. To the uneducated eye, and most eyes in that park were uneducated in this particular art, it looked like beautiful, pointless stretching. A dance for one, with no audience, no climax, no obvious purpose. Enter our counterpoint. If Master Li's world was a still lake at dawn, Zhang Wei's was a demolition derby at high noon. He arrived not with a bicycle, but in a rumbling, modified sedan, bass from his stereo thumping a war drum rhythm even after he cut the engine. At 28, Zhang Wei was a sculpted monument to directed aggression. His body wasn't just fit. It was a weapon that had been forged, hammered, and sharpened in the crucible of the mixed martial arts gym. Every muscle group was defined, not for aesthetics, but for function. The thick neck to absorb punches, the dense shoulders for explosive takedowns, the core of steel to anchor devastating kicks. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, a trophy from an early amateur fight. He wore it, and his skin-tight athletic wear like a badge of honor. This park was his auxiliary training ground, a place to build functional endurance. His ritual was a spectacle of modern combat science. He'd hang his heavy bag from a stout branch of the same banyan tree, a branch that had seen decades of children's swings and bird nests, and now bore the brutal, repetitive punishment of his shins and fists. The thump-thump crack of his combinations was a jarring, aggressive metronome that disrupted the park's softer rhythms. He'd sprint between trees, his breath erupting in ragged, powerful gusts. He'd shadowbox with a ferocity that made passers-by give him a wide berth. Their worlds were parallel lines of philosophy, destined by geography to intersect every Tuesday and Thursday. Zhang Wei, dripping with sweat and the intoxicating aura of tangible power, would glance over at the old man, moving in what seemed like a different dimension of time. A smirk would play on his lips. Here, laid bare on the cracked pavement, was the dichotomy, the hypermodern, data-driven, adrenalized pursuit of combat efficiency versus the ancient, meditative, internalized art of what? Peace. Gardening? It was an irony too ripe for Zhang Wei to ignore. His initial comments were tossed off. Casual barbs meant more for his own amusement than anyone else's. Hey, old-timer, you sure are working up a sweat. Or, careful with those deadly moves, you might hurt a cloud. He chuckled to himself, finding his own humor profoundly clever. Master Li's response was always the same. A slight, acknowledging nod, eyes never leaving the horizon of his own practice, as if Zhang Wei's voice was merely another bird call in the park, noticed but unworthy of specific attention. This indifference, this serene refusal to engage, was like oxygen to the flame of Zhang Wei's contempt. The escalation was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, steady drip of disdain, each drop wearing away at the possibility of respect. It moved from offhand comments to a rehearsed routine. Zhang Wei began to incorporate his mockery into his own training. After a particularly vicious flurry of punches that made the heavy bag shudder on his chain, he'd stop, panting dramatically, and point at Master Li, who might be performing single whip, one hand held in a delicate hook, the other extending out with infinite patience. "See that, guys?" he'd say to his occasional training partner, a fellow MMA enthusiast named Xiao Chun. "That's the problem with all that traditional stuff. It's all form. It looks pretty, but in a real fight." He'd snap out a lightning-fast jab that stopped an inch from Xiao Chen's nose, making him flinch. Speed kills. Intent destroys. That old man wouldn't last 10 seconds in the cage. He'd be trying to ward off a right hook and wake up wondering what year it is. Xiao Chen would laugh, a nervous, complicit sound. The other park regulars, the badminton aunties, the chess-playing uncles, began to watch these interactions with a sort of grim fascination. They didn't like Zhang Wei's brashness, but they also held a quiet, unspoken skepticism about Master Li's art. In a world of concrete results and visible struggle, his effortless flow seemed suspicious. Too easy. Perhaps it was just for show. Master Li, for his part, became a study in profound non-reaction. He wasn't ignoring Zhang Wei. That would have required an active effort to dismiss him. He was simply existing on a different plane. When Zhang Wei parroted his movements, wobbling comically in slow motion, Master Li might be in the middle of playing the lute, his posture perfectly balanced, his gaze soft. A faint, almost imperceptible smile might touch his lips. Not a smile of mockery, but one of recognition, as if seeing a child attempt to mimic a complex dance. This smile, misunderstood, infuriated Zhang way more than any insult could. The internal monologue of our two protagonists here could not have been more different. Zhang Wei's thoughts were a loud, color commentary. Look at him. So smug. So delusional. Living in a fairy tale where slow motion wins fights. I am reality. My hands are reality. My pain is reality. He's a living cartoon. His identity was so wrapped up in his physical prowess that Master Li's serene practice felt like a personal insult, a denial of everything Zhang Wei had worked for, bled for. Master Li's thoughts, if we could hear them, were quieter, more observational. The young pine tree grows fast and straight, but its roots are shallow. It fears the wind because it only knows how to resist, not how to yield and remain standing. The anger in his shoulders, it locks his chi. It makes him strong like a tightened cable and just as brittle. He didn't see an enemy. He saw a fascinating, tragic case study in muscular tension and misplaced intention. The tension built like atmospheric pressure before a storm. The park's social ecosystem chose sides, not through words, but through subtle shifts in behavior. The retirees who did Qigong on the south lawn would glance toward the banyan tree and shake their heads slightly when Zhang Wei's noises grew too loud. The younger crowd, the fitness enthusiasts, would sometimes watch Zhang Wei with admiration, then glance at Master Li with puzzled shrugs. The stage was set for a collision, not of two fighters, but of two diametrically opposed versions of reality. The catalyst arrived on a Tuesday heavy with the promise of a summer thunderstorm. The air was thick, warm, and damp, pressing down on the city like a woolen blanket. Zhang Wei was flying high. He just won his last amateur bout by a dominant first-round TKO. A local sports blog had written a short feature calling him the future of the city's MMA scene. His confidence wasn't just high. It was stratospheric, a brittle crystal palace built on a foundation of recent praise and unchallenged assumptions. He was in the park with his girlfriend, Ling, a sharp-eyed woman whose affection for Zhang Wei seemed intertwined with a clinical appreciation for his social dominance. Today he was showing off. The gloves were off. He was demonstrating the mechanics of his winning elbow strike on the heavy leather bag. "You see, Ling," he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed park. The usual morning murmur had died down. Everyone was unconsciously listening. It's not about arm strength. It's about hip torque. It's about committing your entire body weight into a single, sharp point. You don't hit at them. He reared back and unleashed a strike. Crack! The sound was sickeningly crisp, a gunshot report that sent a flock of sparrows exploding from the banyan tree. The chain groaned in metallic protest. The bag spun violently. You hit through them. It was a violent, impressive display of focused power. Master Li, who had just finished his form and was meticulously folding his thin, gray cotton jacket into a precise square, paused. He turned his head and watched. His gaze was not one of fear or awe or anger. It was the look a master violin maker might give a lumberjack who was proudly demonstrating how to split a log with a beautifully crafted antique Stradivarius. A look of profound, sorrowful recognition of a fundamental category error. That look, something about its sheer, untroubled clarity, its absolute lack of the expected reaction, finally snapped the last thin thread of Zhang Wei's restraint. The crystal palace of his pride vibrated with a seismic fault line of rage. This old man's calm was no longer just annoying. It was an existential challenge. It denied the validity of Zhang Wei's entire world. He strode over the crowd of onlookers, now including the chess players, the badminton annies, and a few early morning dog walkers, holding a collective breath. The air crackled with static, both meteorological and social. He stopped 3 feet from Master Li, well inside the bubble of personal space, a classic fighter's intimidation tactic. Old man, Zhang Wei said, his voice low, stripped of its former mocking humor, now pure, cold steel. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of you doing your dance next to me while I do the real work. You keep looking at me like you've got some secret, like you know something. He gestured broadly, encompassing the bag, his own body, the very concept of effort. This is real. This is what works. So prove it. Prove what you do isn't just for old people to pass the time. Masterly set his neatly folded jacket on the stone bench. What is it you wish me to prove? That it's a martial art. Spar with me. 1 minute. 60 seconds. Show me this internal power everyone whispers about. He sneered. But just admit it's a fancy, stretching routine for retirees. A ripple of unease went through the crowd. Ling called out, "Way enough." He's an old man, but her voice lacked conviction. It was a scripted protest, the kind you make when you're secretly eager to see the drama unfold. Master Li's dark tea eyes settled on Zhang Wei's. He saw not a monster, but a young man in profound spiritual pain, a prisoner of his own tension, desperately trying to validate his existence through conflict. He sighed, a sound as deep and weary as the ancient tree above them. Young man, this place is for cultivation, not for proving. To fight here would be to misunderstand everything about this space and about ourselves. Excuses, Zhang Wei roared, turning to the audience, his arms wide. He was now playing to the gallery, solidifying his narrative. See? All talk, all theory, no kitty, no substance. And then, drunk on his own performance, flush with the certainty of his own physical dominion, he made the critical, arrogant error. It wasn't a fighting move. It was a gesture of ultimate contempt. He reached out with his right hand and gave Masterly a sharp, dismissive push on the left shoulder. It was the kind of push you'd give a door that's stuck or a piece of furniture in your way. It was meant not to injure, but to insult, to physically manifest his dismissal. You are an object. Move. What happened in the next 2 heartbeats was a lesson in physics, physiology, and profound irony, delivered in silent, brutal efficiency. Zhang Wei's push met Master Li's shoulder, but the shoulder did not meet him with resistance. It dissolved. It yielded, retreated, flowed backward along the exact line of the pushing force, like a reed bending before a stream. Zhang Wei, who had committed his weight forward expecting the solid resistance of a body, met only a terrifying gravitational vacancy. His own momentum and aggressive intent became his enemy. He was a skyscraper that had just leaned too far past its foundation. In that microsecond of catastrophic imbalance, Masterly moved. It was not a flashy movement. It was an adjustment. His left foot, which had been rooted with the stability of a mountain, slid back a mere 3 inches, redrawing his base of support. His torso turned, following the flow of the push, his spine as central axis. His right hand, which had been resting palm in against his thigh, lifted. It did not coil back in a fist. It did not telegraph. It simply traveled upward and forward, its path as inevitable as water finding a downslope. The heel of his palm, fingers relaxed slightly upward, connected with the precise center of Zhang Wei's chest, the Danzhong acupoint just below the sternum, a crucial intersection of nerves, muscles, and diaphragmatic function. The impact was not loud. It was a deep, organic thump, the sound of a giant's heartbeat. It was the sound of a keystone being tapped into place, or perhaps removed. The effect was neurologically exquisite. Zhang Wei did not fly away. He simply stopped. Every process in his body that required voluntary control short-circuited. The color drained from his face so rapidly it was as if a switch had been flipped, leaving a waxy, gray pallor. His eyes, wide with a shock that hadn't yet reached his brain, glazed over, seeing nothing. The air he had just inhaled was trapped, a prisoner in a locked vault. His diaphragm, struck at the precise millisecond of its contraction, spasmed and froze. He could not inhale. He could not exhale. The terrifying, animal panic of suffocation flooded his nervous system, but his body could not even muster the convulsions of gasp. His mighty legs, which could squat twice his body weight, turned to incoherent jelly. He dropped first to his knees, a puppet with cut strings, then pitched forward onto his hands and knees. There he remained, a statue of agony, his mouth working soundlessly, his back heaving in futile, spasmodic jerks. A thin string of saliva dripped from his lips onto the pavement. The mighty MMA fighter, the future of the scene, had been reduced to a helpless, suffocating infant on the cold ground by a single, seemingly gentle palm strike from a man in his 80s. The silence in the park was absolute, profound, and heavy. The shock was a physical thing. The badminton antes stood with rackets frozen midair. A chess piece hung from an uncle's fingers forgotten. Ling's hand was clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. This was the twist, and its beauty was in its mundane, academic truth. Master Li was not a hidden martial arts grandmaster from a wuxia novel. He was Professor Li Wan, retired chair of biophysics and traditional Chinese medicine at the provincial university. For 45 years, his life's work had been the intersection of the ancient and the empirical. He had published papers on the neuromuscular efficacy of Tai Chi for patients with Parkinson's disease. He had used motion capture technology to analyze the precise kinetic chains in push hands practice. His understanding of the human body was not mystical. It was intimate, clinical, and profound. He knew the body's levers and pulleys, its tension cables and vulnerable alarm points, with the familiarity of an engineer studying a blueprint. His Tai Chi was not magic. It was applied science of the highest order. This slow motion was a form of sensitivity training, a constant recalibration of balance and proprioception. The form was a library of movements that encoded principles of leverage and off-balancing. He didn't possess supernatural chi. He possessed a lifetime's understanding of how to disrupt an opponent's chi, their physiological coordination, with minimalist, precise intervention. Zhang Wei hadn't been defeated by magic. He'd been expertly, surgically dismantled by a scholar who saw his aggressive lunge not as a threat, but as a self-created structural flaw waiting to be exploited. Masterly knelt, his movements still slow and deliberate beside the choking young man. His face showed no triumph, only a deep, ocean-like pity. He placed his thumb and index finger on a specific point just below Zhang Wei's ear, the Jianjing point, and applied a firm, rotating pressure. It was a release technique, a reset for the trapped diaphragm. With a sudden, ragged, whooping gasp, like a man breaking the surface after nearly drowning, Zhang Wei's lungs unlocked. Air, glorious, terrible, burning air, flooded back in. He collapsed onto his side, curling into a fetal position, his body racked with coughs and sobbing breaths. Tears of pure, unadulterated shock and relief streamed down his face, cutting tracks through the dust on the pavement. Masterly stood, retrieved his thermos from his cloth bag, and poured a cup of warm, amber-colored tea. He knelt again and offered it. Drink. Small sips. It is Huixiang and Peilon. It will settle the rebellious qi in your middle burner. Your system has had a severe shock. Zhang Wei, trembling violently, took the cup with both hands. The simple act of holding it steady was a Herculean task. He could not bring himself to look at Masterly. The humiliation was not public. It was cellular. It was in every fiber of his being that he had believed in one truth and had just been shown another, deeper, more terrifying one. The lesson was clear. He had spent years learning 100 ways to break a body that opposed him. Masterly had spent a lifetime learning the one way a body breaks itself when it is foolish, tense, and blind. The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring as the event already began to transform into legend. Ling helped a shaken, meek Zhang Wei to his car. He moved like a man aged 100 years in a minute. In the weeks that followed, Zhang Wei was absent. The story, of course, became park folklore, growing with each retelling. But the truth was a quiet, private poison in Zhang Wei's heart. He returned to his gym, but the heavy bag felt different. His own reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, a tense, overwound machine. He watched his training partners, saw their tension, their predictable aggression, and for the first time he saw not strength but vulnerability. He had become a connoisseur of his own ignorance. The memory of that silent suffocation, of the world narrowing to a single, desperate need for breath while an old man looked on with pity, was the most effective teacher he had ever encountered. One rainy Thursday morning, a month after the incident, Masterly arrived to find a figure standing under the banyan tree, holding an umbrella. It was Zhang Wei. He wore no fight gear, just simple dark clothes. He was thinner, the predatory swell of his muscles softened slightly, as if the constant internal tension had finally been released. In his hands were 2 wax paper cups of fresh, hot soybean milk, condensation beating on the sides. He saw Masterly, and his body language shifted into something entirely new, a gesture of profound deference. He bowed from the waist, a stiff, formal, but utterly sincere bow. The umbrella tipped, spilling a little rain. Masterly, he said, the title feeling foreign, heavy, and absolutely correct. I brought you a drink. It is simple, not like your tea. He hesitated, the words struggling out. If the offer is no longer possible, if my stupidity has burned that bridge, I will understand. But if it is not too late, And if you can find it in your heart to teach, I wish to learn, not to fight, but to understand. I wish to learn how to see the pebbles. Master Lee looked at the young man. He saw the arrogance had been scoured away, leaving behind something raw, humble, and real. He saw the tremor in the hands that once confidently threw knockout punches. He saw a student where before there had only been a critic. He accepted the cup of soybean milk, his dry, warm fingers brushing against Zhang Wei's cold, damp ones. The first lesson, Masterly said, his voice the same rustle of leaves, but now carrying a new weight for the listener, is Zhan Zhuang, standing post. Is not about being strong, is about being aware, is about finding the ground beneath your feet and the sky above your head and the quiet space where you exist between them without fighting either one. Is about learning to stand so you never have to be stood up again. He took a slow sip of the soybean milk. Let us begin. And under the ancient banyan tree, as the rain pattered softly on the leaves, the man who knew 100 ways to force others to the ground began the lifelong practice of learning how to simply, truly, and unshakably stand on his own. And so, the ultimate irony was consummated. Zhang Wei, who had dedicated his youth to the art of forcing other bodies into submission, discovered that the most profound submission required was not of an opponent, but of his own raging, ignorant ego. His greatest fight wasn't in a cage with a roaring crowd. It was the silent, daily battle to stand still under an old tree in the rain, and in that stillness, to finally hear the deafening truth he'd spent a lifetime drowning out with his own fists. The final shock? The most powerful stance he would ever learn required him to do nothing at all. Just stand there. Try it. Right now. Feel that? When have you witnessed a moment where deep, quiet expertise completely dismantled loud, confident arrogance? And what did that teach you about the nature of true strength? If this story of invisible physics and visible humility resonated with you, give this video a like. It's the digital equivalent of a respectful nod to the master lease in our own lives. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever studied an art that seemed passive to outsiders but felt profoundly powerful to you? Or have you, like Zhang Wei, ever had a moment that completely redefined what you thought you knew? For more narratives that find epic lessons in everyday encounters, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for being part of this community. Remember, the ground is not just something we fall to, it is what we stand upon. See you in the next video.